Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Redbrick Leadership Series this afternoon. I'm Katie Schulz, and I'm a 2016 graduate from Miami, currently serving on our Miami Alumni Board. Today, we have our next installment of the Redbrick Leadership Series. This series was created to highlight different high-profile alumni around the Cleveland and Northeast Ohio areas. It's a moderated discussion talking about different career paths, Miami experiences, and then what's up next for our future alumni. So today we have Kristen Grabenstein with us. Thank you so much for joining, Kristen. A little bit of background about Kristen. Kristen graduated from Miami in the class of 2001. She's an accomplished philanthropic strategist with more than 15 years of experience in both the corporate and nonprofit sectors. She has worked for organizations including the Cleveland Foundation, Forest City, and Ernst & Young. Currently, she serves as the Philanthropic Officer at the Cleveland Foundation, where she supports a portfolio of donors to ensure their philanthropic activities are aligned with their long-term goals. Additionally, she is working to develop a new Center of Philanthropy for the Cleveland Foundation and has launched a pilot philanthropic program called Foundations of Philanthropy, which is a 9-month cohort for emerging leaders to learn different philanthropic skills and strategies to help them succeed in business. Prior to joining the Cleveland Foundation, Kristen served as the Community Relations Manager at Forest City Realty Trust, where she was a vital liaison between the company and community stakeholders, worked on grant making, employee volunteering, and community engagement initiatives. Kristen is also a founding member of the Cleveland Orchestra Young Professional Program called The Circle. She has served on the board for the Dobama Theater as a College Now mentor and also as the co-chair of the chapter of United Way Young Leaders. So without further ado, thank you, Kristen, so much for joining us. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Katie.
No problem. Okay, so we'll kick it off with our first question, which is, what led you to choose Miami, and what were you involved in while you were on campus?
Sure. So when I was 18 and I was looking at colleges, I really had no idea what I wanted to major in. So I really wanted to go to a big school that had a lot of opportunities to explore different majors, but also had a strong liberal arts foundation. And so that's really what led me to Miami, because Miami had such a great reputation for academics across all of its schools. And I knew that no matter what major I picked, I would have a great education at Miami. I was also really lucky. I had spent about a week on campus as part of a summer camp. And so I think when I was probably about 12 years old. So I had some experience on campus, and it really felt like home to me even before I started there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then you asked about campus involvement. So one of the first things that I did when I arrived at Miami was to audition for the Miami University Choraleers. So I was lucky to get in, and I was a member of the Choraleers for all 4 years that I was at Miami, and served as president of the Choraleers my senior year. And I have really, really wonderful memories of singing with the Choraleers at Hall Auditorium, the Ceremony of Carols in Kumlar Chapel, going on tour to New Orleans and to New York City with the group, and just having a really wonderful experience singing with the Choraleers.
That's awesome. Sounds like a great time. So when you said you were looking for the opportunity to explore lots of majors, did you know you were going to go into business when you got to Miami, or kind of how did you find yourself down that path?
I had no idea that I was going to go into business. I probably surprised everyone, including myself, by ending up being a business major, because I was always really passionate about the arts, and I knew that I wanted to have something about the arts in my career and in my education, but I didn't really want to major in the arts. And so I was really spent probably my first year and a half at Miami exploring how I could sort of find my own career path that involved the arts, but was something else. I thought about becoming, a leader in an arts organization. And I remember looking through back then, this is probably not even when you were there, but we had a catalog of majors. And I remember actually reading through the catalog of majors and on organizational leadership. And when I read the description of that major, I just really connected with that. And I thought, this is what I want to major in. So that's how I ended up in the business school. I majored in organizational leadership and I absolutely loved it. I still think a lot about things that we discussed in some of those classes, like motivation and work and leadership and learning. So it was a really wonderful experience. And I really ended up loving being a business major, even though I had no idea that I was going to end up when I started at Miami.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that Miami has that opportunity to kind of explore a bunch of different majors. So after Miami, walk us through kind of your career path up into today. Like, where has the world taken you since leaving Oxford?
Sure. So my career after Miami has definitely not been a straight line. It's definitely zigged and zagged along the way. So as I mentioned, I'm really passionate about the arts and I really wanted to work in the arts. So right out of Miami, I went to grad school at NYU and I studied nonprofit performing arts administration. And so from there, I landed an internship at Roundabout Theater Company in New York, which is one of the largest nonprofit theaters in the country. So after my internship, I actually ended up working at Roundabout for a couple of years. And in some ways, it was really my dream job. But I was working in fundraising, doing grant writing and sponsorship proposals. And I really felt like I still had something that was missing that I wanted to do in my career. And that was, I wanted to get a background in finance. So this is where I made my first really big zig in my career. I completely changed gears and I went to work at Ernst & Young and became a CPA. That was a huge transition going from Broadway to accounting.
Yes, definitely.
But honestly, I'm so glad that I did it because I learned so much about finance and accounting and working for big clients. And believe it or not, I actually had a nonprofit arts client when I worked at E&Y. So it was also a really great experience. And I'm really glad that I did it. But then my next big zig or zag was actually after I moved back to Cleveland. So I was really lucky that at E&Y, they had a really big presence in Cleveland. And so I was able to transfer back here while I was still working for them. But when I decided that it was time to move on from E&Y, I wanted to work at a company that had a really strong reputation as a corporate citizen. So I went to go work for a company called Forest City, which was a big real estate developer that was based here in Cleveland. And they had a really strong reputation as a corporate citizen, meaning they were really involved in the community. And so I went to go work there in internal audit. And I got really involved with the company and all of their volunteer programs and community relations programs. So I would do things like go into classroom for a day and teach the students or do tutoring, serve as a mentor through College Now, as you mentioned. So I just got really involved in the community through my job at Forest City. And then one day a position opened up in philanthropy and community relations. And so I applied, and believe it or not, actually my background, having that accounting, understanding, also having worked for a nonprofit and having gotten involved in the community through Forest City, I was really fortunate to land that position. And so for 5 years, I worked at Forest City in their community relations and philanthropy program. And I led the community relations, the volunteering, and the philanthropy for about 5 years. And that leads up to my last zag. My most recent ZAG, which is about 2 years ago, Forest City actually was sold. And so I realized that it was probably going to be time for me to move on in my career to the next phase.
Mm-hmm.
Started to think about, everything that I had done in my career and what I wanted to do next. And it just so happened that the Cleveland Foundation had issued a job description for a new role that they were creating, that they were looking to fill, Philanthropy Officer. And I looked at the job description for this new position, and it seemed like such a great fit for me, for my interests, for my goals, and for my past experiences, that ended up being my next move. So I've been at the Cleveland Foundation for about 2 years now. And it's really been a great experience. I've been working, as you said, to launch a new Center for Philanthropy within the foundation, which is a resource for donors to become more strategic in their philanthropy. And we also have, as you said, a new program called Foundations for Philanthropy, which is an educational program for young professionals to learn about and engage in philanthropy. Since I have a corporate background, we started a new corporate network to engage the corporate community in our work at the foundation. And I also work one-on-one with donors to help them in their philanthropy.
That's amazing. Wow, you have a lot going on. I love it. Perfect. So you've had philanthropic leadership roles in both corporate and nonprofit. So what advice or best practices can you give to current or aspiring leaders listening today, about where they can go when they're starting to get involved, or kind of what resources they should look at?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really lucky in Cleveland. We have so many wonderful nonprofit organizations that are doing really great work for people to get engaged in. But what I would say to start with really is to think about your own values and what causes are really the most important for you. So once you do that, you can sort of blend those together into a personal mission statement. So an example of what my personal mission statement would be, I want to help young people become more engaged in the arts. And then once you have that personal mission statement, that will really help you to narrow down the organizations that you're thinking about getting more involved in. And then the second thing I would say is to think about how you really want to get involved. And we often think of this as time, talent, and treasure. So what do you have that you want to give back? Do you have time? So then you probably want to find an opportunity where you could volunteer a lot. Or do you have a skill that you'd want to give back? You might want to serve on a board or do something that really would, where you could apply that skill to the organization. Or do you have treasure and do you want to financially support an organization? And some resources that we have here in Cleveland, if you're interested in finding out more about how to become civically engaged, I would highly recommend the Cleveland Leadership Center. They have programs for people at all stages in their career. So for executives, they have a program called Leadership Cleveland. They have Bridge Builders, which is aimed more towards mid-career professionals. And then they have Onboard Cleveland, which is more for young professionals and early stage leaders. So they really have programming for anyone, and it helps you to really go through some of these activities, think about what's important to you, what difference you want to make in the community, and then match that up with what's happening actually in the community. And for young professionals, I would also recommend Engage Cleveland. They have a listing of all of the nonprofit organizations that have like a young professionals board or a young professionals group that you can join. You mentioned the Circle, the orchestra, so that's just one example, but there's tons of young professionals groups here in Cleveland if you want to get involved.
That's awesome. Those are all incredible resources. Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
So at Forest City, you played a key role in kind of re-envisioning the company's community investment strategy. How did you go about that and gaining buy-in from different leaders in the community and then executing your new strategy?
Yeah, so I would say there was really three key things to help get buy-in and implement and execute a new strategy. So the first thing I would say is relationships. So in my role, as I mentioned, Forest City was a really involved corporate citizen. So that was something that was really important to the leadership of the company. And so I actually met regularly with the leadership. So the CEO and the CFO would meet regularly with them and give them updates on the programming, the nonprofits in the community. So I was really lucky I had strong relationships with them. And I also had relationships with other leaders throughout the organization because really when you're in a role like that that is about community relations, you really get to know everyone in the organization that has an interest in volunteering and getting involved. And many, many leaders and executives, they serve on boards or they would come and ask, how can I get more involved in the community? So sometimes we would match them up with a board and help them. So I was able to really build up relationships across the organization. So I think I had a lot of trust from the leadership. So that was really the first thing, was having strong relationships and having a lot of trust built up with the leadership of the company. The second thing I would say is having expertise. So I was a member of some professional organizations in philanthropy, including Philanthropy Ohio and ACCP, which is the Association for Corporate Contribution Professionals. So I would go to a lot of training and conferences and really just try to get a strong understanding of what the best practices were for corporate philanthropy programs. And then the third thing I would say is time. So the strategy was something that was developed over time, but really was fully fleshed out and long before it was implemented or long before there was even buy-in on the strategy, so that it was a fully fleshed out program. And then it was just a matter of really picking and choosing which pieces of that were the timing was right to implement those pieces. And then finally, so one example of that would be volunteer time off. I had always wanted the organization to have paid time off for individuals who wanted to go volunteer in the community. So I drafted up a policy and was just kept talking up that program over time. And then eventually I had talked it up enough that, the timing was right to implement that program. So I would say relationships and trust, expertise and time were really key to getting a new strategy implemented.
Perfect. Those are all great pieces of advice. I love it. So now at the Cleveland Foundation, you've developed a new Center for Philanthropy and launched this pilot philanthropic education program called Foundations for Philanthropy. What skills and strategies do the leaders participating in that get exposed to, and kind of what are you going over in the 9-month curriculum?
Yeah, so this is a really in-depth and hands-on program. So we have a lot of guest speakers that come in. We have nonprofit leaders, community leaders. We have experts that work at the foundation that the participants get to interact with, ask questions. We do a lot of hands-on exercises. And we actually walk them through the philanthropic process over the 9 months. So the program starts off with an overview. We look at what are the biggest issues in our community. So we bring in our program staff and they get to meet one-on-one with them because they're really the experts in the different areas. So for example, there's a program officer for education. There's a program officer for arts and culture. So we bring them in and give an overview of the key issues that are in our community. Then we walk the group through creating a shared mission statement. So we talked a little bit about that and so really the group, we do a lot of exercises to help them look at their own values, and what are the causes that are most important to them. We have them each draft their own personal mission statement, and then we had the group come together and do a shared mission statement. From there, that really dictates the way the rest of the program goes from there. It's sort of like choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
So, for example, our pilot cohort, they picked out of school time activities for middle schoolers. So then we really did a deep dive into what does that look like in Cleveland? What are out of school time programs? What's happening in that area? So we brought in the program director. So she really talked a lot about that and what's happening in that area. And then we had them come up with a list of nonprofits that they wanted to think about funding. And then we walked them through how to do research and analysis on those organizations. So this is another area where having a background in accounting and finance really helps, because we really did ratios on the financials of the nonprofits. We talked about what was important to think about, what creates financial stability among nonprofits, that sort of thing, to really think about holistically about the organizations that they were considering funding. And then we were going to go have site visits at the organizations and see them in action and meet with their leaders. But that was right when the pandemic hit. So we had to take everything virtual, but they got to meet virtually with the organizations. Then they got to deliberate on who they wanted to support, and then finally award grant funds to the nonprofits. So they finally, the pilot cohort picked 2 organizations that they decided to support. So really walks everyone in the program through from looking at what are the biggest issues in our community, which issue do you really want to focus on, what's happening in that area, what organizations are working in that area, and then how do you think you guys can make the biggest difference?
That's amazing. I love it. So is your second cohort starting up, or has the pandemic postponed that?
Yeah, it did postpone it. So originally the program was meant to run almost on a school year, starting in September through May or June. As I said, we had to take the first cohort virtual for the last couple sessions, and we decided to just do a fully virtual cohort for our second cohort. So we're actually postponing, and we're going to start that in January. We're going to run for 6 sessions instead of 9 sessions, just because, sitting on Zoom for a long time, we're sort of trying to minimize the amount of time that we're on Zoom, but we're still trying to make it really, really engaging and interactive for our participants.
That's awesome. So besides the pandemic, what other obstacles have you faced when developing the cohort and getting it off the ground for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that the biggest obstacle is that this was a brand new program. So there was no guide to how to create a program like this. So it was really an effort of brainstorming the program. There was a lot of thought went into it. Just having these brainstorming sessions, doing some research on other programs around the country and how they run. So we really built out the framework to start off with, like, this is how we think it should go. And we had the 9 sessions built out, and then we had our pilot cohort. And from there, as we went along, we were sort of building it as we were flying it, building the plane as we were flying it, because each session was new. And as I said, there's an element of it that was pick your own adventure. So we were also responding to what the cohort was doing when they selected out of school time for middle school. We had to adjust and use that going forward. So, it was very entrepreneurial. I've really never built something from the ground up like that before, a program. that was really the biggest obstacle, was just how do you create something, that didn't exist before. And then, as I mentioned, the pandemic happened and we had to adjust our plan, take it virtual, and now take the second cohort fully virtual. So I don't know, maybe when we get to the third or fourth cohort, we'll
be back in person.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you rolled with a lot of punches, especially with the pandemic and trying to get everything off the ground. So what would you say your goal, let's back up. How have your goals or strategic plans for your career path kind of changed because of the pandemic, or not even just your own career path, but within the Cleveland Foundation?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I mentioned, that everyone has been dealing with this, right? Everything going virtual. So, me and my role and my colleagues had to take everything virtual. We do a lot of events for donors through the foundation, for our programs like Foundations for Philanthropy, for our corporate group. So we had to adjust and take all of that virtual. But our grant making side also really had to adjust to the pandemic, and they had to move really fast. I'm not sure if you are aware of or heard of the Greater Cleveland COVID-19 Rapid Response Fund, but that was the local effort to really pool resources among philanthropy. It was housed at the foundation, and they raised over $8 million to give, and they gave it away really fast. Like every week, they were giving away that funding from, I think, March through June to the organizations that were really hit hard and were serving on the front lines of the pandemic. And now, actually, that fund is moving into phase 2. So that work is continuing. And then with everything else happening, not just the pandemic, but there's been a lot of other things happening in the world with the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd murder. So those things and the pandemic really have drawn a lot of attention to some systemic inequalities and racial injustice that's been happening in our society. And I think the field of philanthropy on the whole is really going to be impacted by that, and is really sort of turning and shining a light on those inequities. And so I think that you'll see philanthropy really working on those efforts. I think you'll see that as a key component of the Cleveland Foundation and the work that we're doing in Cleveland, and throughout all of our programming, including for young professionals, donors, everyone.
Yeah, that's great that you guys are able to kind of pivot and deal with all the different situations that are going on in today's climate.
Yeah.
What are some ways that leaders on this call can promote philanthropic initiatives at their own company?
Yeah, that's great. So many companies do have some kind of program, philanthropic or volunteering. So the first thing I would say is to see what your company is offering. They may offer a match, which is where if you make a philanthropic contribution, your company will match that contribution. They may have a volunteer time off where you could actually take a day off and go volunteer. They may have board support where you could join the board of a nonprofit organization, a day of service where everyone goes and volunteers together, or there may be other volunteer programs. So my first thing would be to just explore, see what's on your intranet, talk to someone internally, see what your company is already doing. If your company doesn't have a program, then I would encourage you to advocate for your company. And I would say start with human resources, because a lot of companies really recognize that community engagement is something that's important to their employees. And so it's really a win-win for the company if they have a community presence, because it's something that they can offer their employees that their employees are looking for. So if an employee goes to the HR department or the leadership of the company, they're very likely to be receptive to having some kind of community engagement.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are great suggestions. What is the best career advice that you have received, and also the best advice that you would give to aspiring leaders?
Okay, so a couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and there was actually, if you went a day early, there was an improv activity. So of course, I was like, yes, activity. So while I was at that activity, I actually met a woman that was a philanthropic leader. She runs a foundation, a very well-respected foundation in Northeast Ohio. And in getting to know her, I realized that we actually had very similar backgrounds, which I told you my path, it's kind of zigs and zags and it's kind of. So she had started in art history and then had pivoted and become an attorney and then ended up in philanthropy. And so I think I was saying something like, oh, you have like a crazy background like I do. And she said to me, I used to think it was crazy, but now I'm proud of it. So my advice to others really stems from what she said to me, which is, follow what's right for you. Don't worry about what other people think, and own your choices and be proud of your path and your journey.
Yeah, that's great. For sure, especially since nowadays a lot of people are, shifting career paths, and you've clearly made it work from accounting to philanthropy and back and forth. So I love that.
Absolutely. You don't have to follow a set path, things change over time, interests and goals, and it's okay to go with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so to wrap up, we thought we would ask you some fun questions about Miami and Cleveland. So our first one is, what is your favorite place on campus at Miami?
My favorite place has got to be the Slant Walk, and I am thinking that it must be so beautiful there right now.
For sure. I know, it's like the perfect campus. What's your favorite place off campus? Like uptown?
I mean, does anyone not pick Bagel and Deli?
I know, I miss those so much. They're so good. What is your favorite Cleveland sports team?
Oh, my favorite team is the Indians. I am a lifelong fan. My dad used to take me down to the old stadium every week back in the days of Brooke Jacoby and Corey Snyder and Tom Candiotti. So I am a lifelong Tribe fan, and I just hope that we can see them win the whole thing here.
Hopefully, we came so close. So
I know, multiple times.
Hopefully in the future. What is your favorite Cleveland restaurant?
My favorite restaurant is Tommy's.
Oh, I've never been, but I've heard good things on the
Oh,
side.
yes.
I'm more of a West Sider, so.
Make a special trip to Coventry so you can have a milkshake at Tommy's.
Is that your top recommendation of what to get there?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Hopefully everyone can try that out.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Cleveland activity or thing to do in the city?
I have to go with the Metro Parks, especially during the pandemic. My family has gone to the Metro Parks almost every weekend. It's such a great resource and something that it's easy to take for granted, but it's actually really special to have those parks in Cleveland.
For sure. I know there's so many like gorgeous ones. And then lastly, what is one word you would use to describe Cleveland?
I would say authentic.
That's a good one. I like it. Perfect. Well, thank you, Kristen, so much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to our Redbrick Leadership Series with Kristen. It's been so great learning about your background and getting to dive deeper into your history and different philanthropic activities in Cleveland. So thank you so much again, and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Katie. It was great to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.